Welcome to our celebration of life today, and Happy May Day. Our musician is Bill Chilton, and our opening song is Will the Circle Be Unbroken on page 89 of the textbook. Is that too loud?
No.
Okay.
89. Everybody got it? We'll do 4 verses on the top.
Bill, could you repeat that again?
There's 3 memorial verses underneath. We're going to do the 4 on the top. The main 4.
Thank you. I'm an aging baby boomer, and
Well,
I can't hear it.
I don't see as well as you, but I hear them.
There we go.
And I talk loud when I need to forget.
There are those who fought for freedom.
Welcome to the First Baptist Central Congregation of Atlanta. We are a philosophically based spiritual community founded on existentialist and feminist principles. We make our spiritual home in the Old Stone Church, which was hand-built by the African American Antioch East Baptist Church. We acknowledge that racial hostility drove those African Americans from the area, and we honor them and the powerful history of this place. We also acknowledge that in the 1800s, the Muscogee Cree people were driven from this land, and we support justice for all Indigenous people. And we'll have more on that a little later down in the order of service. These words are from the song Dreamer by Mitch Watermill. Dreamers have a way with life, the ability to make things real. I live the life of a dreamer. Is there anyone here for the first time or the second time? And if so, would you like to introduce yourselves and let us know how you came to be here this morning? Any takers?
Good morning, I'm Bob Jones, and this is my second time coming. And the reason I'm here is because I got a total.
Thank you, Art, and welcome. I would like to draw your attention to the, where's my program? There's a, what do you call it, connection card on the program you can fill out and turn in and, continue communications with us and learn more about us. You also can opt in to receive our weekly email blast from our email skipper, Robert Stewart. And also the newsletter is published on our website and also comes in an email if you get on that email list. The monthly newsletter is edited by Jan Visser. Is anyone celebrating a birthday or an anniversary today? And if so, would you like to come up and we'll sing to you. Okay. Well, happy May Day. Our next song is The Earth is Our Mother, and it is in the new book, so that would be in alphabetical order. And if you're like me, you have to think T, that comes after R, S, after S. If anyone has community announcements, would you please write it down and bring it up to me, and we'll read it later in the order of service. And we now invite our fellowship minister, the Reverend Marcia Mitzner, to come forward and share her thoughts for the day.
Great to see everybody here this morning. It's not quite as pretty today as it was yesterday. I hope that you will hear, if you weren't here yesterday afternoon, to participate in our Get Out the Vote, that you'll hear about it, that you'll see some of the pictures, and you'll be enticed to be sure to come back, come to the next one, because we had a great time. We had good music, we had good food, and I'd like to thank the Action Committee and the other people who participated in helping us to set up and do all the things, bring food. And it's really, this is, I've said it help others participate in the process as much as that we can. So I hope that you will, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, so that you're the ones that are going to be out there doing this. But spread the word to everybody that you can, how important it is that we do pay attention and do our part. I want you please to continue to keep the people in Ukraine in your heart, and be aware of the suffering that's going on there, the suffering that's going on on our south border, and everywhere throughout this. We are so fortunate to be in a country, in a place, in a community where we have the privileges and the rights that we do. But we can't take them lightly. We have to continue to fight to make sure that they continue. But be aware of those that aren't so fortunate and hold them in their hearts and to put out love and goodwill into the world. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Marcia. Silence is a cornerstone of character. Those are words by Ohiyesa, a St. Dakota man, also known as Dr. Charles Alexander Eastman. He was born in 1858 in Minnesota, educated at Boston University, and is the first Indigenous American to be certified in Western medicine. Silence is the cornerstone of character. At this time, we'll have a period of silent meditation. And there are candles on either side of the sanctuary if you'd like to light one for any reason. Let's have some silence. Our next song is When the Mountain Stood Alone, and that's on page 44 of the Pink Songbook.
We all know this song.
Take your mask off.
We pretty much know this song, so whatever you need to introduce. 4 verses, we're going to do all 4.
The branches of the forest in the petals of the marigold on the shoulder of the mountain in the vastness of the sea. You will find a brooding silence over all the ancient watershed. You will see it written plainly on the wind and in the sand. In the green world of the forest, in the stillness of the silent pool, there is fear and there is trembling for a certain stranger there. Now he walks upon the mountain like a warlock of the countryside, and she scores the ancient meadow, laying waste the forest green. There's a light upon the mountain, there's a sickness in the evening sky, and we ask the age-old question, can we purge us of this sin? Can we save a little nesting from the venom of the cankerworm? Can we clear the look of
Last weekend was a special weekend. And historic Muscogee Creek Summit, an incredibly meaningful, informative, and inspiring conference, was conducted by Muscogee Creek individuals from Oklahoma, Indigenous people from other states, and local activists. It was an intriguing mix of scholars, authors, political activists, and Indigenous people advocating traditional ways. It probably was historic because such a gathering most likely hasn't taken place since the 1830s, when the United States forcibly removed Muscogee people from Georgia and the southeast of Oklahoma. Most likely it's not taking place here in Georgia. The conference theme was Singing Ourselves Back Together, community and the Wilani Forest. And Wilani is the indigenous name for the South River. The conference was all about protecting and living in harmony with rivers, forest lands, and all things of Mother Earth. It was a gathering of diverse people who dared to dream about a better world to live in. Our First D board and individual members of the First Existentialist congregation stepped up in a big way to support the summit. First D contributed more than $1,300 to help cover expenses, and we loaned chairs, tables, a lectern, and water dispensers to the conference. Numerous summit organizers deeply thanked us for our contributions. The members of the First D Indigenous Justice Committee are, and those of you who are present, please raise your hands. Nancy White, Joe Henry, Lorraine Fontana, Edith Covington, Leon Gleigel, Linda Bell, Charlene Ball, Catrice Baker, and I serve as committee chair. The panel discussion members will be Lorraine Fontana, Joe Henry, and I have asked Art Jones, filmmaker, and to join us because Saturday he made many insightful observations about what he observed that day. Art always makes insightful observations, so thanks for joining us, Art. At this time, we'll start with the slideshow, and committee members, or panel members, please feel free to make comments. Now, she goes through the slides, and then we'll give some general impressions afterwards. Have a question and answer session. Robert, could you turn out the fan lights? Okay, thank you.
If you want me to pause, you can say so.
Oh, yeah, just go ahead. I'll give you a signal to the one, I guess. This is Professor Craig Womack, former professor at Emory University, and he opened the conference, and he's a published author, and he's a part of Muscogee, living now in Tennessee, and he's a fabulous speaker and a great singer and a musician, plays in a band in Tennessee. Any comments? Lorraine, anyone? Okay. Now this is, Lorraine, help me with the name. This is Mako.
Hebron Kernel. Say Hebron Kernel. Hebron Kernel. And Meko is a honorific title of him as a leader.
I think it means leader or something.
And he's from the Healthy Ceremonial Grounds in Oklahoma.
And he the welcoming ceremony. And she's a remarkable speaker, an orator, and very inspiring. Okay, I think the next one is Indigenous. Okay. Now this is on the right, Bundia did a lot of work, met with us here to organize. The Bundia is of Mexican indigenous descent. Another name is Gerardo Castan, and the other name, Lorraine, you have is the raccoon.
Yeah, that's Reverend Avis E.
No, I
Williams.
meant Bundia's other Indian name.
What are you asking? I'm sorry.
His Indian name, raccoon, it doesn't matter. Hard to
Actually,
pronounce.
raccoon, yeah.
Yes, this is,
She's going more by a Bundia now.
and this is a doctor in the middle, Dr. Avis Williams, local activist in Covington, just a remarkable person. Reverend Dr. Avis Williams. And on the left was Craig. Now, Avis is with Laura Harjo here, and another very remarkable person, a professor at the Oklahoma University.
Yeah, University of Oklahoma.
And they were, in this picture, let's see, what were they doing? I guess this was at, I didn't bring my scheduled events.
Yeah, the Reverend was often talking about her own history in the Covington area and family history, because she does have indigenous family history also. And there was a lot of talk later on, we might talk more about it, and the relationship between Native American tribes and freed Africans and other African enslaved people in Georgia, and what happened as they left Georgia.
Now, Professor Harjo asked the audience to break out into small groups, and her charge to them was to imagine an indigenous community in the forest here. What would that be like? And so everyone went to these tables with these large sheets of paper, and they drew pictures or wrote down themes and so forth. That's true. How you can have a sustainable, harmonious village. And one of the classes that she teaches is Indigenous community planning at the University of Oklahoma. So this was an exercise that she has her students do there. Okay. Next. And this is a group doing the writing. Okay, next. Here's an example of, you can see healing, learning, art. One group said there'd be like a center, a plaza for ceremonies and so forth. Okay, yes. There's your central plaza, I believe. Sacred place. Yes. And then Laura asked each group to come up and explain what their visions were for such a community. Okay. There's another example. And yes. Now this is Professor Daniel Wildcat, and he had us sit in a circle and just give an incredible presentation.
Just to say, he's part Muscogee and Yuki, and he's a professor at the Haskell Indian Nations University.
It's in Lawrence, Kansas, just so you know. And it was originally like those schools that the government set up that Indians had to live in where they were so mistreated. But it is now just a very good university for Native peoples, and the whole population is Native.
Haskell University, Kansas is a place where many prominent leaders in Indian communities have graduated from college. And he had a real interesting approach. You know, he said we can focus on the problems and, you know, how great the world is, but we must always remember to, you know, rejoice and have joyful moments also. And
Can I say he's the only one that had us sit in a circle during the whole time? I noticed that he had everybody rearranged, we were in a circle, which I knew right away meant there's going to be some different way of looking at things that he gave us. And I'd like to say more about this later, because he was the one that said things that really were amazing to me.
a very pleasant man, and he had the, I want to mention his 3 Gs along with that, being feeling good about life also. We received gifts, we should give gratitude and generosity. Those are things that he lives by. Then this was a supper, I believe, on Friday, a week ago Friday. So you see it was very informal, participants just on the ground, you know, like this, okay? And then if you closed Friday night, there was a stop dance, so with Mr. Cornell there on the right is someone who was here in November, a leader in the stop dance, and so was Cornell. And if you look at the woman in the back there, she has shaker rattles on her feet, and that was the rhythm of each separate dance that they did, and it was really quite remarkable. So, yes.
I can say, I don't know if you have a picture, one of the pictures of her later on, do you? If not, I can say who she is.
Yeah, you know, I missed that program. This was Tressa Gouge, was that her name?
Yeah. She's a Muscogee ceremonialist at the Redbird Smith Ceremonial Grounds in Sequoyah County, Oklahoma.
And you can probably see that those shakers are made out of turtle shells, of the hard part that the turtle lives in.
And you guys can take off your masks if you want. So, if you feel comfortable. And so this is Saturday. Next. Saturday's program began with Professor Mark Mosslinger on the right, Dr. Mosslinger, and Reverend Dr. Davis Williams. And they talked at great length about, slavery in the area of this particular forest. And next, I think we'll see go ahead.
Just before we go on, just about Mark, he was a visiting professor at Emory, and probably out of that visit here and the history that he studies all the time, he wrote a book called The Accidental Slave Owner, Revisiting the Myth of Race and Finding an American Family. And it's about Emory University's history of white supremacy, slavery, that kind of thing, in relation to the founders
might not know, what was the overall purpose of the conference?
Well, my feeling is that, first of all, it was in support of keeping rampant development from just taking over everywhere in this world and making the world a better place. There was a lot of fun things, but it was to bring people together to just begin to share ideas about how to move away from the colonial settler way of looking at things, which is that the earth is just a bunch of resources to be exploited in order to achieve and accumulate wealth, the Native American approach and the Indigenous people really all around the world, the approach is more not resources, but we're all related, and we need to, respect and nurture the earth, which in turn nurtures us. And so sharing ideas about that was just the prominent theme throughout this conference. Lorraine?
I agree with everything you said. However, the reason that it was happening here and now is because of what's happening on Rilani, which is that Atlanta City Council voted to give the Atlanta Police Foundation the ability to take that land and develop a lot of it into a new police academy. So what they want to do is basically destroy some of the forest in order to do that. And there's been, as people might know, a big coalition effort from all different places that failed to stop it from going forward. But there are people who still call land defenders who are convinced that they can stop this from actually happening. So there are people, while this was happening, there was a live recording, live stream going on to some folks in the forest who stay there. Some cut from trees, some come back and forth and visit and patrol, basically, to watch for when more bulldozers and people are going to come in. So that's been happening, and the reason Scott Banks happened last year and this is happening is in relation to that. And yes, it's a much broader view, but that specific fight is what's happening right now.
So how many acres are being cut down? Didn't the city council reduce the number of acres?
I can't quite hear what you're saying.
Didn't the city council reduce the number of acres affected? And how many acres were affected?
Yeah, as some people mentioned during this, there's partial victories. Some people don't feel it's enough, and obviously it isn't a victory if you don't stop it from happening. But the partial victory was that the original acreage was much reduced because the people that called into the city council, this was during the pandemic, and complained about what was happening, didn't want it to happen. I think 70% of the calls I got were against this happening, either totally or in that place, using that area in that forest in South River and Trenchant Creek. And so in order to appease or show that they were responding in some way, they reduced the number of acres that they were going to use for this police training center, which was a partial victory. It's like 40% reduced, something like that. So it saved some of the land.
Yes.
Yeah, so another notion that I've been involved in Standing Rock.
Would you take your mask off?
Yes,
I was out in North Dakota or Minnesota, South North Dakota when the Standing Rock, oil protests occurred / war, mini war. And I wrote a book on it. It's in Barnes & Noble. Maybe later I can get more into that. But the main thing I would just say is there's got to be a kind of very contemporary discussion about energy policy on both sides of the fence. So like, it's very easy to say like the police or, you know, the problem, or the other side would be what happened in 2020 with like the riots downtown. So the thing is like, where if gas is kicking up to like $4 a gallon and diesel's $5, they're gonna frack the Bakken. Like that's what we're protesting, to sort of defuse the bomb, for lack of a better term. You know, it's going to be, I mean, there's going to be live bullets pretty soon, I promise you. It's not even a question. And it's going to come from both sides. I've heard people talking about killing pipeline workers. One of my friends was asked to blow himself up at a suicide bomber. I mean, literally, there's a lot of stuff that people just don't know. I have an FBI file about the felony charge. They were throwing felonies out like candy. You breathe wrong, you get a felony. Terrorism threats, like law. So, but the main thing of all is like, just in summary, allies can use these spaces and inspire other spaces that like try to kind of come up with different ways to defuse the bomb. Because there are going to be young people. The bottom line is there's going to be young people that are going to be like radicals, and then they don't necessarily have the patience, you know. So what these spaces offer is some kind of, actually, fundamentally a mental health thing. Like, the last thing I just say is there's a 311 number that literally just came out, I think, recently. So don't call 911 if there's a mental health emergency, call 311. I mean, that's actually probably coming from something like this eventually. So, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to say I come to this event last week in part because I'm doing research for a film project that goes back to earliest colonial America, and looking at the English who came here, the Europeans who came around 1607, and their interaction with the Native Americans up until around 1619, when the Africans who came on the Portuguese ship that was hijacked and then brought to Port Comfort. And what I was hoping to get, because I already have access to African American scholars or European American scholars, was to touch base with a Native American scholar who we could include in this project to get something from the Native American perspective. But what I learned once I got there, and this was something that was imparted to me by way, is that the major focus of this event was to draw attention to the fact that there was this sacred Indian land, or Native American land, that was being commandeered by the Georgia state officials to utilize for creating a police training facility. And what it made me think about is an early case in around 1820 where a Native American had, the chief of the Native American tribe in Ohio had sold land to a European who was looking to purchase it, and then there was another person who had purchased the same land but from a European. And when they were going to court, what the judges ruled is that the Native American had rights to settle on that land, which meant that they could occupy it, but they were not given the natural right to actually possess and own their own land. And that it was the European who sold it to them that had rights that superseded the Native Americans' rights. And this goes back to essentially 1452 and the creation of the Doctrine of Discovery by the Pope in the Vatican, who essentially said to the King of Portugal and to the King of Spain, travel forth, venture forth to other lands, and when you find non-Christians or non-Europeans, God has given me the right to give you the right to subdue, to rape, to pillage, to plunder, and to convert to Christianity those who are considered to be uncivilized, those who are considered to be heathens. And fast forwarding back to, or coming full circle with what we're talking about today, Dr. Mark Ostender opened his presentation by speaking about what he's going to cover. And he starts with the Revolutionary War, and he talks up until around the beginning of the 20th century. And good part of his talk focused on the relationship that Native Americans have with Euro-Americans. And what stuck out in my mind was his mentioning that the Muscogee people had engaged in slave ownership. And I didn't get a chance to ask him during the Q&A, but he and I spoke afterwards, because I was curious to know whether the Muscogee people were engaged in slavery or in ownership of slaves prior to European intervention in North America. And he said essentially they were not, at least not in the way in which we think of slavery in the more Western context. So one of the things I found very curious in his talk is, and I find myself doing this whenever I listen to someone who's a scholar speak, is language. And when I read history books and they talk about the conflict between Native Americans and the settlers who came, or the invaders who came, whenever the invaders won a conflict, there was a victory. Whenever the Native Americans won a conflict, it was considered a massacre. So the definition and the connotation or the imagery that comes behind the same action being performed by two different people carries very different meaning. And what stuck out in his talk to me that I couldn't quite shake was how the Muscogee people were one of the 5 civilized tribes. And I thought this is coming from the people who initiated scalping of Native Americans and literally cutting off the top pieces of their heads to indicate, for payment to indicate that they had actually killed a Native American in the push towards the West to basically steal more land from these people and eliminate them from the land in which they came. And the other piece here is that he talked about the 1821 land lottery in Oklahoma, where there was this big push for acquiring land, pushing further west. And within that, there was the focus on the need on the cotton gin. And with the creation of the cotton gin, the transition from a tobacco-based economy to a cotton-based economy in the South. And both requires a tremendous amount of land. And so a good part of what I used to think of as the Trail of Tears as being a push to get rid of Native Americans in the East, I'm also better understanding a good part of that is because that land was to be used to create new cotton fields.
Yes.
Okay, so that was something that came out of the talk that I thought was pretty illuminating for myself. And without monopolizing the rest of the talk, I'll turn this back over to Wayne.
Camp Park also identified something like 21 plantations in this immediate area, and named and there was a naming of the slaves. I believe this is a good point that are in the records. So yeah, it was Professor Daniel Wildcat probably summarized the purpose of this, and that is it's time for a cultural climate change in which the world is viewed not as a world of resources, but a world of relationships. We're all related. And so at this point, it's getting late in the order of service, so Patton, could you just flip through, and we'll just not comment now on these slides, but just give the general idea of what.
We should at least name the 2 women we just passed by.
Let's move it on.
Just name them.
This is Dr. Jacqueline Eccles. Yeah, I would like to move on because we're running into 12:15.
Notice the chairs.
Oh, this is an important part. This is an important part, the ratings. I missed this panel discussion, but it was about land bank. And there's a lot of comments about that. So the rating, could you just briefly
It wasn't just around land bank. One of the questions that Craig, who's moderating, asked, was to ask each person up there. We hear about land back in the last 5 years is when it's really come up and become a movement. What did it mean to each of you? And what was interesting, I'm going to go into a lot of notes about it. It's clear that not all Indigenous folks and Native Americans think the same meaning of land back. But what the people here mostly seem to agree is that this is what changed my mind totally. Because I was thinking of land back in the very European colonial way of you own land, and you have a deed to it, and you lose it, and you get it, and you can give this chunk of land back to somebody. Now that may happen, and they wouldn't be opposed, of course, to get certain lands back where they had more control. But mainly, they don't see land back in that way. They see land back as, one person said, the mother, the earth, is calling us back to her. One person said, this is about a relationship with the land and everything that's living on the land, and we are one of those things. So it's not about, for instance, if this land that's taken now and is going to be used is still controlled and built on, doesn't mean we should not be there and still relate to the land in the way that is proper. The interrelationship of those beings and the respect for those beings and what we give and take. Anyway, I wanted to read one particular, when Daniel Wildcat was talking about it, he said that although there are different ideas among Indigenous folks, for instance, younger folks who are very much into, in Canada, are very much into a more of an Alcatraz, less occupied land kind of idea of land back. He said that this is not a real estate transaction. To him, it's not a real estate. Where the idea of ownership of private property is involved. But it calls for rematriation. People use that term. Professor Harjo used it, I think she created that term, as an Indigenous feminist. It's a rematriation, a connecting of our human selves with Mother Earth, a non-colonial way of being. So he's saying you're trying to return to a deep and respectful honoring of that relationship. He did say, when they were being asked a lot, what about what we're doing here, what the land defenders here, non-Indigenous folks, are doing with this land, trying to protect it, and what's been happening. And he said, anything that you are doing is good. He didn't want to, say this tactic, that tactic. Everything that people are able to do is good, including those people that were listening to him and other people on a live stream who were sitting up in a treehouse in some of the forest areas.
Okay, yes. Lisa Gallo. This was a supper on Saturday night, and it was just a really good time. People had been together for 2 days, and there was a lot of sharing and socializing. Okay? There were some cowboys, at least one wannabe, and now some of our First Team folks that attended. Try children's things.
Mr. Gloria Taylor, this is one of the streets that are now as well.
Stephen, Matahio, that is a Lakota term for in all my relations.
What's it
We were all related.
What is it mean?
We are all related.
Yeah, all my relations, and entering the sweat lodge for sacred ceremonies, each person entering will say Matahio, in all Ojibwe did not like the Lakota, it's a derogatory term, too. So thank you very much to the panel and to the IJC committee. And also thank you, Lorraine, for the many photos. For community announcements, come connect with your food and the earth that cares and nurtures it. The 7th annual Atlanta Soil Festival is May 7th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Truly Living Well Center for National Urban Agriculture, College Town Farm, 324 Lawton Street, Southwest Atlanta, and there's a $25 general admission, free to seniors. And see Mary Howard afterwards for many details. Okay, our closing song is Lean on Me. It's in the new book,